Welcome to Everyday Martial Artist, a weekly podcast where you'll join me, Brian Doucette, as I interview a different martial artist each episode and hear their story. Some guests you may have heard of, and some you probably haven't. Be sure to subscribe where all your favorite podcasts are available. Also visit our website at everydaymartialartist.com. If you're listening for a specific interview, I sure hope you'll stay and check out the other episodes. A very special thank you to Topher Williams for our custom theme music. And now, the newest episode of Everyday Martial Artist. Everyday Martial Artist is brought to you by KOOnline.com for all your martial arts needs. Sparring and safety gear, rank belts, uniforms, weapons, patches, and more. Wholesale supplies made by martial artists for martial artists. Visit us today at ko-online.com. Hello and welcome to Everyday Martial Artist. I'm your host, Brian Doucette, and as we do every week, we're joined by a brand new guest talking about their life and their journey throughout the world of martial arts. My guest today is the founder and head coach of Radical MMA in New York. Prior to founding Team Radical, he was an active MMA fighter in the New York area. He's trained in martial arts for almost 50 years and holds instructor ranks in multiple styles. He lived and trained in Japan, but was forced to move back to the U.S. after a freak car accident. He's trained under many renowned instructors like Rigan Machado, Professor Marcelo Garcia, and Professor Lucas Lepri, and also the Santos Brothers. In addition to his successful fighting and teaching career, he's fluent in Japanese and holds a master's degree in East Asian Studies with a concentration on Japanese military history from Columbia University. Please welcome my guest today, Mr. René Dreifuss. How are you doing today, sir?
Very, very good. It's wonderful to be here, and thank you again for this invitation. I'm very honored.
I appreciate your time. I'm looking forward to learning more about you. And what we do with all my guests, I want to go back to the very beginning. I know I mentioned you've been doing it almost 50 years. I want to know where that started. Kind of where did that first spark come from that led to your interest in martial arts?
Sure. Well, way back in 1975, New York was a little bit of a tougher place. And I was a kid that was being bullied quite seriously. And for my dad is Jewish, and it had some anti-Semitic elements to it that I understand now. And so I was looking to defend myself. I was really small and not particularly athletic and really wanted to protect myself. So I started watching Chinese Kung Fu movies on this thing called drive-in theater, which was this Saturday morning, replay of the badly dubbed, Kung Fu movies.
Nice.
And I would be trying to copy what they're doing. And then my father walked in, he goes what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm trying to learn Kung Fu or karate or whatever I said. And he's like, okay, I got to actually take you to a real school. So my father knew someone in the neighborhood who was training at a martial arts school, and he brought me there. And my instructor was Toyotaro Miyazaki, who's a very famous karate practitioner. And I started under him in 1975 and began my martial arts journey. And, I think a lot of martial art businesses are very kid-oriented right now. Back then, when I walked in, I was the only kid. I was the only non-adult in the room. And that soon changed. I mean, by the time I'd been there for a few months, it had turned into, having about 10 kids. And one was his adopted kids, too. And but then I was training with adults, and then more kids came, and I started in traditional karate. But our traditional karate style was very eclectic. He's a very well-known Shotokan practitioner, but he was always very open-minded and welcomed people to experiment with boxing, with all sorts of other things.
That's cool.
And so I remember when I was 10 years old. This is 1979, 1980, where he said, Renee, boxers have some of the best power generation in martial arts. You should really, look into doing boxing because I think it would help you with karate. And of course, being the closed-minded, person that I was, I'm like, no, I'm good with karate. But, he would always have these things where he would say, hey, judo's fantastic. Why don't you do this? And he was always, this was very uncommon back then.
Yes.
But he was very, very encouraging because he was so secure in his martial arts that he was never threatened by other people. In actuality, he found martial arts of all types fascinating. And then I started doing some traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu. I started experimenting like everybody in the 80s with a little bit of modified, JKD, but not seriously. Bounce around some things. I started being very good friends with a number of Taekwondo guys and wound up competing in Taekwondo, training Taekwondo for my undergrad school. It was New York University, and they had a Taekwondo team. So I would compete for them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just had this kind of like big background of different martial arts. But my real experience was one of my senpais, one of the senior students, was a judo brown belt. And I said, this is way before the UFC or anything like that. It was, 1986 or 85, 86, right? Karate Kid time. And, we're sparring and he says, judo, if you do this, I'll grab you in the judo thing. I'm like, okay, I don't think so. And, we start sparring and I'm on the ground immediately, thrown really, really, really hard and immediately understood if this was concrete, my ribs would be completely broken. And I was like, okay, maybe I was lucky, right? And then he just proceeded to do it 10 more times and put me down whenever he wanted to. And I said, oh, there's something really, really important to learn here. This is very important. Of course, the minute you'd close into infighting, you'd be open to be grabbed, particularly with the gi on. But a lot of times he didn't even grab my gi. And he didn't understand wrestling in any way, so it was just all upper body grabs. And I had a very similar experience with someone who actually knew freestyle wrestling, and instead of the upper body grabs, it was the lower body grabs. And I said, wow, there's something here. And my instructor said, yeah, no, grappling is a very important part of fighting, and you should explore it. And so I started exploring judo. I was still very much into the striking arts.
Okay.
I started exploring kickboxing and things like that. But then I moved after I graduated college, I moved to Japan, which I was inspired by one of my senpais. And in 1992, I moved to Japan.
Before you get to, I definitely want to talk about moving to Japan. I want to back up a little bit. That first school, I want to think back to the first one or two classes. You were getting bullied, you saw it on TV, you wanted to do it, but once you got there, what was it about it that made you want to stay there?
Oh, I didn't want to stay. I hated it in the beginning
because
it was so hard.
Okay.
Yeah, because it was hard, and I was a spoiled little soft kid, and out of shape. And my first lesson, somebody punches me in the stomach. I'm like, oh, and I go, Dad, I want to go home. He's like, dude, I paid for the month. So you're going to finish out the month because I paid for it.
Okay.
But by the end of the month, I loved it because I also understood that I needed it.
Nice.
And I also, my instructor was I'm sure everybody says this, but I really feel my instructor, Mr. Miyazaki, was a very special human being. True, he had the lineage of the samurai, but lineage doesn't mean anything. He carried himself like a very quality human being and a very, very important mentor in my life who, showed me how to live with honor and integrity and with compassion and all these really important human things. And he became like a second dad to me. I looked up to him. He was a very scary guy, but at that time when I was a kid, but he also was a very avuncular, compassionate guy who, would very often drive me home from practice to make sure that I didn't have to go home late and take care of me. And, and he took us on skiing trips and, like things that, outside. He was just a wonderful human being.
Okay.
And, so I developed a very strong relationship. My father died when I was in high school and he became a very strong mentor to me too. So, but I will tell you this, I was never actually very good at karate.
Oh, okay.
I was the hardest training kid there, but I was not very athletic. I was not very coordinated. So I grew up with a father who's like, his priority was academics. He's like, you need to get into a good college. You need to, go to school. You need to, this kind of thing. He's like, playing sports is not a big deal. He was European. So he's a Holocaust refugee. He's European. And he's like, it's important that you study. So I never grew up playing baseball or soccer or any of the sports that people grew up. So my coordination was very lacking because, there's this time between 2 and 6 where your body starts really understanding itself neurologically and you develop your proprioception and things like that, how to hand-eye coordination. And, I was very lacking. And I think that's one thing that keyed into why people thought I was an easy target in bullying. Obviously, there was a sort of, a discrimination element too.
Yeah.
But it's also, I was just an easy target because I was uncoordinated. And so I would be one of the hardest working kids in the training, but when I would train 10 hours on something, other people would get training 30 minutes. It always took me longer. So after years of training, I said to Sensei, I'm like, am I any good at this stuff? And he goes, Renee, he goes, you're adequate.
Ouch.
And it was
Jeez.
like, ow.
Wow.
But it's funny because on the other side of the spectrum, when I started grappling, it just felt much easier for me. It was
Okay.
just, I'm a grappler.
Okay.
Wow, I didn't realize that. And it was the opposite. I would try something and it would just make sense right away. So I think, it took me time to understand what my foundation was in the martial arts. And I also think that striking of any type, boxing, kickboxing, karate, taekwondo, to be very effective, there's an element of speed, power generation, and coordination that is absolutely a must to be functional. You have to be a little bit coordinated. You have to be a little bit powerful, fast, especially fast, and precise. And if you don't have those attributes, striking can be difficult. I've seen this with people who come from boxing schools, and I had one student, and he'd been boxing for years with a very, 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 very good coach. And you would not know that. You would think he never even took one boxing class because he was really, really terrible. Because in terms of his physicality, his coordination, his balance, his body awareness, and his proprioception were incredibly low, extraordinarily low. He was just very, very unathletic. So he would put this time in, and I said, oh, he's sort of like me, but obviously even worse than I was. So he put in 6-7 years in boxing and got almost nothing out of it. Yeah, and I think that happens to more people than you think. I mean, especially if we're talking about functionality. I mean, people can go to a gym, karate school, taekwondo school, whatever, and if their goal is cultural appreciation, if their goal is weight loss, weight management, their goal is meditation, cultural, whatever, then, more power to it. But if we're talking strictly in the terms of functionality, can you use this thing in either a competitive setting, in a sports competitive setting, or in a self-defense setting, versus another person who is trying their hardest not to let you do that? Then we're talking athletics and ability. And you can see people who have trained for many, many years and are still not highly functional against anybody who's athletic. I've seen this many, many times where, an athletic kid walks into the gym and in 10 minutes he's beating the guy who's been there like 3 years, because their athletics matter. Understanding your body matters, in striking especially. And striking arts are generally not good at teaching you how to use your body well, generally speaking. But it's funny, grappling arts tend to make you a better athlete. And I think particularly Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu does this well. It takes your athletic potential and slowly, with the right teacher, of course, slowly improves it. And I found that true, that over years of grappling, I actually wound up understanding my body much better. And then when I came back to striking, of course I had a background, but I came back to it, I was learning things at light speed because I just understood my body in so much more efficient ways. So I had, my first week of like real competitive, real hardcore, like neuroboxing, after I'd been grappling for years, I probably understood more about striking in that 1 week, right, with a really high level coach than I had for years before in striking. And that's not to discredit my teachers.
Right.
Even in Japan, I had some good teachers. It was just my body wasn't ready to absorb that information.
Nice.
And so it's kind of interesting. So this is one of the reasons why in my academy, I start people for a lot of reasons, but one of them, I start them with grappling first, particularly if they're not gifted athletes, because the grappling teaches them to be a better athlete if you work it properly, if you work the system properly. And you can see that with one of the reasons why wrestlers dominate in the UFC. People say, well, it's a great foundation, and it's this, and it's hard, and wrestling is difficult. And yes, all those are true. But I also think that there's a level of body awareness and understanding that allows people who've gone through high-level grappling to sometimes assimilate with the right, not always, but with the right foundation, you can assimilate other arts better. And I see this, people who come from certain arts have very, 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 very much difficulty assimilating new arts. But people who come from grappling don't have those same barriers in general. Obviously, they're outliers, But if you look at mixed martial arts, which by definition you have to assimilate different martial arts, one of the reasons I think grapplers dominate is because they're better at assimilating things than people from other arts. And you can see that, like I'll take Adesanya, if you follow Adesanya. Adesanya is an incredibly gifted striker. I mean, absolutely phenomenal striker. And yet, over his 9-year career so far in the UFC, I think it's about 9 years now, maybe it's a little less, his grappling has improved, his this has improved, but not by leaps and bounds. But then you take someone like Alexandre Pantoja, who is a high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner. When he started, his striking was horrific. horrific, like absolutely like terrible. And right now, he's quite an accomplished striker years later. Again, about 8-9 years later, he's quite gifted. And the same with Alexander Volkanovski, who is a former champion. The guy started in wrestling and is known for his incredibly, clean striking now. But he's actually a grappler first.
Yeah.
There are many more instances of grapplers learning to be high-level strikers than there are of high-level strikers learning to be high-level grapplers. Or take down. Yes, so it's very interesting. So this is one of the reasons why I personally had that experience of grappling teaching me how to understand the code, the source code.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, here's the source code. Oh, now I can manipulate that. And I can put this source code into boxing. I can put this source code into wrestling. I can put it into jiu-jitsu. I can put it into whatever art I'm trying to do, and I can make that thing work better.
Nice.
And I've had that experience with students, not only in the unarmed arts, but also, this surprised me, but I had a student who was a Filipino knife fighter, and he came and trained with me for a while, put the knives up, didn't train for a long time. And he comes to class, and he goes, Renee, I went the other day, I went back to my colleague instructor, and I hadn't been there in 2 years. I haven't trained in 2 years. And he said, I went there, and I beat everybody. And I'm like, but you haven't trained for so long. He's like, yeah, but it's like I kind of understood everything a little bit better, and I used my brain better, and I used my body better, and I sparred everybody, and nobody could touch me. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I was surprised because I wasn't expecting it to be as a carryover for the weapon arts, but it turned out it was.
That's really
so
cool.
I think at someday, Bruce Lee said this. And this is my philosophy now, and I agree with it. It's like styles, he said, let's get away from the classical mess of styles. And I think one of the reasons he said that was political, that, it's always infighting. But I think another reason is that really what we want to think about is the source code, is the biomechanics. How is our body working as an efficient instrument? How do dancers make their body look so graceful? How does Michael Jordan become the most graceful and most effective basketball player of his generation? What is it to be a combat athlete? And that's what I'm trying to do now. I don't call what I do karate. I don't call jiu-jitsu. I just say it's mixed martial art combat. And I'm going to teach you how to use your body. I'm going to teach you how to turn your body into a very, very, very effective weapon in all ranges and in all scenarios. And my journey really started when I went to Japan. I mean, obviously I'd trained, years before that, but when I went to Japan, it was an eye opener, and I experienced multiple different styles there, and that's was fantastic for me. But yeah, anyway, so that was that's sort of a long answer to that question.
No, that's cool. One more question before we get to the Japan, because I'm definitely interested in that. You had mentioned the college Taekwondo team and competition and stuff. What led you, being someone who didn't play sports as a kid, what led you to the competition side? And first of all, did you start competition in the Shotokan school? And do you remember your first martial arts competition?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Okay, so this is actually very interesting.
Okay.
My goal was always self-preservation.
Right.
And because I had this bullying incident, and then I also had an incident where I was assaulted by a person who was mentally unstable, and the person tried to murder me when I was a kid.
Wow.
They grabbed me, pulled me into an alleyway, smashed my head against a brick wall, and then managed to pour lighter fluid on me and set me on fire.
Wow.
Yes, and I escaped. I barely escaped. I had the kid's book bag, and that person was 300 pounds heavier than me. I'd already been training karate at the time, but this person was 300 pounds, and I was, I don't know, 10, 11 or something, right? And I was I don't even know how much I weighed, maybe 105 pounds or something. I was a little kid,
Yeah.
and so I hit the person, tried to struggle, and it was nothing happened. And then I just lost because obviously power and size matter. And of course, this person was mentally unbalanced. So they have a higher level of aggression, and power. People who are, crazy can generate a huge amount of force because they don't have these circuit breakers that normal people do. And I mean, literally, it was like fighting a gorilla. And I got smashed up against a brick wall, got a concussion, went unconscious for a second, woke up, and I'm on fire. But I managed to get out of my winter parka jacket and book bag, which were on fire, and ran away. I, kind of slipped out and ran away. And, it was a very traumatic experience for me. Couldn't even talk about it for years. It was weird. My parents never knew. Because it was weird. It was, I felt a deep sense of shame, especially like, I did martial arts for these years and I couldn't defend myself. I must be such a loser and, a lot of negative self-talk.
Wow.
But I think what drove me to compete was like, hey, I want to really understand violence, right? And obviously there's no UFC or, you can't pick street fights or anything like that. But I was like, let me go into competition. And I was the world's worst competitor because I also had a lot of fear.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't coordinated and I would lose almost every match, even against people who I was better than, because I had no sense of self-esteem and, dealing with kind of like a PTSD kind of thing. And I didn't believe that I could actually, so I'd lose the matches even before I went in. And I remember, this wasn't my first, but I remember we had this visiting team from Venezuela and they were really, really good. And they came to our dojo and we met them and they were really wonderful, nice guys. And the next day we all competed in this big tournament and I faced one of them and I got whooped. I mean, just murdered, right? And then the next day on Sunday, or it was Monday or whatever it was, the next day, they're still there. And I sparred them in the dojo. And then without all the nerves and this and I had the guy's number much better. And I realized, I'm like, wow, one day I completely lost. And then the next day I was actually doing fine. I said, there's something, I had enough introspection to understand it. It's something beyond technique. Yeah. This is something internal to me that I have to correct. So I tried to make as much attempts to compete in as many things as possible. And I also knew that I needed some other things. I couldn't articulate what I needed. I didn't have that experience with my senpai who was a judo man until that point. Mm-hmm. So I didn't understand that, yes, grappling can be this missing piece of the puzzle that helps you get out of spaces where people are grabbing you, obviously. Grappling is grabbing. But, I was always looking for things. As I said, I did a little Aikido jiu-jitsu, a little this, trying to figure out what was missing, but never really could put it together the right way, but I would compete. The reason I started competing in Taekwondo was very, very simple. I had some very good friends who were on the Taekwondo team and they said, hey, you do karate? And I'm like, yeah, well, we do Taekwondo. And, back then there was a lot of inter-style rivalry, but we didn't feel it because we were friends, from before. So, and also my friend was very secure person and he said, karate's cool. And I said, well, I don't really know much about Taekwondo. He's like, hey, why don't you come to my Taekwondo class and we'll start training. And I did it. And I asked permission from my sensei and sensei's like, yeah, of course, cross train. It's wonderful. And my sensei was very good friends with Junri's nephews, one of them is John Chung, and they're all, part of the Junri larger family. So he was always respectful. He's like, all martial arts deserve respect.
I know John.
Started training. Yeah. Oh, you know John. Wonderful. Yeah. I think he's in DC area right now.
Yeah. He's been on my show. So.
Oh yeah. Right. So he used to be based in Amityville originally.
Yep.
And I think he was up here, and that's when he became friends with my instructor.
I think his brother still has a school there in that area. So
yes, that's right. His brother's exactly right. Exactly right. Yes, I actually drove by it maybe like 3 or 4 years ago just to see if it was still there.
Cool.
So cross training, as I said, my instructor was very open-minded and respectful, and he, unlike most of his peers at the time, he absolutely loved cross training and respected everybody and thought all martial arts had a place. So I started training Taekwondo, and then the person said, "Hey, one of our members of our Taekwondo team can't compete. Do you want to be on the team? And I'm like, but I'm not a Taekwondo black belt or anything like that. He's like, yeah, don't worry about it. So we started training, and I got promoted, and and started training on Taekwondo. But a few times I got disqualified for excessive contact because
Nice.
the rules are different, right?
Yep.
Like in kickboxing, that time was also kickboxing. So I was like too much face contact, or it was like I got just the first few times I just kept getting disqualified for excessive contact because I didn't know the rules very well. And but yeah, no, it was a lot of fun, and learned a lot. And started, as I said, that was in college, so I had grown up a bit, but I still was not the most natural competitor. At this point, I'd already started understanding the judo. Like I said, I had that experience with my senpai, who was a judo man. That was also in college. So I started already experimenting and learning judo and doing that. And so I didn't compete in judo, but we'd be, doing randori in the dojo, and then competing in karate, competing in taekwondo, and a little bit of kickboxing. So that was what I was doing when I was a kid. Yeah.
Very cool. And then, obviously, you mentioned a few times, but so what led to the decision to move to Japan?
So yeah, it was really interesting because I think, like you told me your background that you moved to California. I think we feel these calling, and I think martial arts always called to me. When I was 14, I had a senpai named Gil who moved to Japan, and he was older than me, and he had already graduated college here, but he got accepted to a Japanese college, and then he's like, yeah, I'm going to go train in karate in Japan. I'm like, well, if he could do it, I could do it. My parents said, could you just do it after you graduate college? And I said, yeah, sure. So the day after I graduated college, I moved to Japan. That was it, and it caused a lot of consternation in my family. My father had already passed away by that time, but my mother and my aunt and all these people were like, do you really want to go to Japan and do this? But I also had a bit of wanderlust in general, that I wanted to see the world, but really I wanted to train. Martial arts was calling me. It was calling me. And I never thought I was a savant, but I also knew that martial arts was my bliss, where I felt at peace, and I felt some sort of self-actualization was going on, or I was moving towards that. So, in 1992, I took a flight, and I was very, very scared because, no job, no place to live.
Wow.
Just like, I had a girlfriend who was Japanese at the time. So for the first week, I was able to kind of rely on her and her family to help me get settled. So I didn't speak Japanese very well. I did study Japanese before I went. I studied Japanese in high school. I went to high school, the only high school that at that time offered Japanese. It's much more common now, but it was rare. So I actually chosen that high school because it offered Japanese. But my Japanese wasn't that good. And then I got there and got a job teaching English and enrolled in a karate school right away. And it was a disaster. It was a disaster because I realized that the things that I thought about Japanese karate, meaning that it's going to be so much better over there. It's going to be like 10 times more intense. It's going to be this and that and that. And it's not. It's the same everywhere. There are people who are good and there are people who are not. There are people who are recreational and there are people who are not. And there's also the teaching methodology at that time. Like I said, I wasn't a savant, was not really working for me. But my biggest thing, and this is the biggest incident, and the reason I quit karate in Japan, I was doing Shotokan. I walked into the Japan Karate Association, and I respect them. So this is going to sound like I'm trash talking. There are a lot of people in JK who are wonderful, fantastic human beings, and there are some instructors there that were really great. But what I witnessed, and this is actually very common in Japan, unfortunately, was a very, very, very serious bullying incident. So I got there early to class. And I was stretching, and I saw a high school team, or college team, training in the JK at Honba Dojo in Tokyo. And at that time, it was located, I believe it was Ebisu, I forgot, which is a little bit south of Shibuya. I think it was Ebisu or Meguro, I forgot. It was that area. This was a little south of Shibuya area in Tokyo. And I was warming up, and the captain of the team took out a bamboo stick and was screaming at this guy and hitting him. And it became a very serious bullying incident that was abusive.
Wow.
And I was an adult enough to say that this is wrong. And I was looking, I guess you could see it on my face. That guy was looking, because I was looking at him. I was just waiting for class. And he's like, and basically he goes, in Japanese, just like, what's up? Like, what are you looking at? And I understood it as a provocation. And I'm like, this is not cool. Martial arts is about respect and humanity. Yes, hard training, but not abusive training. And Japan has a problem with this. They have a problem with what's called ichime, which is bullying all throughout their society, not just in the martial arts, but even recently in judo, where I never witnessed bullying in judo. I'm sure it exists, but I never witnessed it. But it became a very serious problem because a Japanese judo teacher bullied someone so badly that the student died.
Oh, wow.
And not from training, just from the bullying, and it happened in Taiwan too. So this is just a problem in Japan. And I witnessed that, and I'm like, you know what? I cannot surround myself with people who are not quality human beings. And, I was very lucky. Like I said, my instructor, Sensei Miyazaki, was a wonderful human being. And I'm like, to me, I thought all Japanese karate guys were like that. Well, obviously not. Human beings are human beings, They're good people. You have good apples and bad apples, like anywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I was assuming that everybody was like him, and it was unfortunate. The other thing is, at that point, I was already very into a little bit more of a kickboxing style, which was absolutely not accepted in the JK framework. So they're like, don't do it like this, do it like this. You can't do it like that, do it like this. And I understand that that's their style. I get it. But I'd already kind of moved beyond that. And infighting is something that Japanese karate is generally not focused on. Japanese Shotokan, I should say, is not focused on infighting. And when Japanese karate does focus on infighting, it usually doesn't allow strikes to the head. So this is a very big gap in the training. And when you understand that and you're good at it, it's very powerful weapons. Obviously, Western boxing is a very powerful weapon. So when someone tells me to not do something that is working very, very, very well for me, it's an issue. So I was always had a little issue there, but I did what they said. I never deviated because I'm trying to be coachable. But the bullying incident made me just not want to go back. And I didn't feel that I was growing. I felt that I was, that just wasn't for me. So what I did was I kind of had this depressive moment where I came all the way over here and it's not turned out to be what I thought it was. And, you had these sort of long, dark night of the soul. What am I doing? Maybe my parents are right. Maybe I should go back to law school, But it turned out to be a wonderful thing because the next, when I got out of that funk, the next day I woke up and I walked into a judo school, the Kodokan, and I'm like, oh, this is great. This is amazing. This is new and it's functional. It's like, boom. Though there was some funny experiences. And then that led me to experience Japanese shoot fighting, to, the MMA styles of Japan, Russian Sambo, which is hybridized in Japan, but trained very seriously. And all the martial arts that people were trying to be the cutting edge of what became mixed martial arts. And it was great because you were right at this moment where they were birthing something new. So, the UFC came along in America, but before that, the shoot fighting leagues in Japan were always experimenting with mixing, and they weren't quite where the Brazilians were, but they were the same thing. They were pushing the envelope of mixing striking and upper body wrestling and grappling and mixing, what they knew from judo with sambo and this and that. And it was just fascinating because you'd see a blend of tons and tons of techniques. Now, at that point, I'd been doing judo, and I've been doing judo very seriously. But the first day I saw what you would call today mixed martial art, I'm like, that's what I want to do. That's it. You're punching, you're kicking, you're elbowing, you're kneeing, you're throwing, you're submitting, you're doing everything. And I didn't think of it at the time, but it was what Bruce Lee said, take different elements of the martial arts and put them together in ways that express you as an artist.
Right.
Artists don't paint in, only the color blue. Well, except for, what is it? Picasso's blue. What was it? Picasso has that moment where he only painted.
Yeah, the blue period. Yep.
Yeah. Blue period, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yes.
Yep.
But other than the blue period, those artists paint in different colors, right? So why would we limit ourselves to one dimension of combat? Why not explore all dimensions? And the thing is, Japanese traditional jiu-jitsu is mixed martial arts. Not in the modern way we define it, but there was no samurai that said, oh, I only do atemi, or I only do kansetsuwaza, or I only do nagewaza. No, they were training everything. They were training sword, they were training throwing, they were training striking, they were training this, they were training how to fight in armor on horseback. They're how to fight when they're, there's a whole subset of Japanese jiu-jitsu, how to wrestle when you're in a river, because it's very interesting, but it was always mixed martial arts. So I'm like, yeah, this is new, but really what we did is we balkanized what should be much more open and what's the word I'm looking for? More holistic. And so that was when I saw mixed martial art in Japan. I was like, this is it. This is what I've been looking for. Because even as a judo person, I'm like, well, I would just punch you here. And then as a karate person, I'm like, well, I would just throw you here. But I can't because the rules don't let me, And, why am I playing to an artificial set of rules? Like, why not we fight with no rules? And I think I was thinking that way. Japanese were thinking that way. Of course, the Brazilians were thinking that way. The Russians were thinking that way. Everybody was kind of moving in that direction.
Yeah.
And you even see in the pop culture, I mean, there's so many movies where the octagon, and people fight, no rules underground, even before the UFC, that was like part of our pop culture. And the striking arts were already melding because this is how modern kickboxing got developed. It's basically taking the kicks of the Asian arts and melding in with the boxing of the West, and then adding in the low kicks of Muay Thai and the clinch of Muay Thai, and just hybridizing the different styles. But then it just wasn't much of a leap to say, okay, now we're going to add in throwing. Now we're going to add in submissions. And then, of course, 1993 happened and the UFC came and, changed martial arts forever.
Right. And
showed that, wow, grappling was really, really important. And, I was watching the first UFC and I'm like, yep, been doing that. It's not a surprise to me, but it was a surprise to everyone else.
Yeah.
Like that, we all grew up on Mike Tyson and Ali, and to see a skinny little Brazilian guy just dominate people on the ground, it just showed that our understanding of combat was limited. But the thing is, if you went to Iowa or, a wrestling room in California or a wrestling room in even New Jersey, which is a great wrestling state or whatever, in America, those people understood that Western wrestling is a martial art.
Yep.
We were just brainwashed to not think that way. You go to any judo room and they're going to be like, yeah, this stuff really works.
Right.
Like it just, yeah, right. It's just popular culture brainwashed us to see combat in certain ways. And also not just popular culture, but an idea of fisticuffs, this sort of like, well, we don't kick because I remember when I was a kid, kicking's for girls. Why? What are you talking about? Yeah. Right? Oh, you can't roll around the ground. Fight like men. Fight like gentlemen. What are you talking about? In a real fight, that's what's going to happen. They're going to grab you. Why are we creating an artificial, artificial
narrative.
Environment?
Yeah.
Narrative, an artificial narrative based on some sort of values that will not happen in real life. And I knew that because I was assaulted by someone and the first thing they did was grab me and I couldn't punch them and I didn't know how to get out of the grab, and they smashed me up against the wall, right? So I knew it at the heart. Yeah, we have to understand how to punch. We have to understand how to kick. We have to understand how to grapple. We have to throw, wrestle. And as I said, I saw it in Japan, a shoot fight, and I'm like, this is it. This is what it is. And then the UFC came and, showed everybody that grappling was really important. But, and I will say the Gracies changed the landscape, but at the same time, mixed martial arts showed that unidimensional thinking is flawed. So even though the Gracies were amazing, a lot of what they did was unidimensional. And if you're multidimensional and you have more weapons and more understanding and more tactics that go holistically through the combat zones, you will just be a more advanced fighter. So yes, grappling is important, wrestling is important, but the first things that happen in a fight, usually is an unarmed fight, is, punches fly and you need to know how not to get hit. And it helps to take someone down if you've punched them in the face. So if you look at, and the same thing, if you look at all traditional Japanese martial art, traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu, almost all the time, a throw will be after you've done an atemi, right? So, you were saying that you had an Aikido background. If you look at the difference in Aikido and Aikido Jiu-Jitsu, very much, they actually took away the atemi a lot. But that is an integral part of those arts, that you hit the guy before you throw him.
Right.
And if you look at any historical book, the throws very often come after, I've done some sort of percussive strike to hurt you or off balance you. And then the throw becomes easier. And you can see that in the UFC, that statistically speaking, the most successful throws come after the guy's been punched in the face. It's obvious. You're like, ow. Yeah. Oh, wait, now I'm throwing out, it's just obvious. So mixing together, it just makes sense. It makes everything easier. And the other thing is, you get out of what I call false complexity. things can get very, very complex in a chess game when you and I play chess, right? You move here, I move here. Now, if you're playing chess across from a gorilla, you move a piece and then he goes, ah, and throws the board over and hits you in the face. Like complexity only exists, certain complexities only exist when we've created these parameters of not allow this, not allow that. And that really is one of my pet peeves, that why are we doing false complexity that is completely useless,
Wow.
So.
Yeah. So how long were you in Japan, and how long after you started training before you had your first full contact fight?
Yeah, well, I'd actually done full contact before that.
Oh,
I just
okay.
didn't do, so I was doing full contact kickboxing.
Oh, yeah.
And I did some full contact in Japan.
Your first MMA fight then, I guess.
Yeah, sure. Actually, most of my fights are Valley Tudo,
okay.
Which is MMA, but it allows headbutts and groin strikes.
Okay.
So it's like the old school rules where, and there was one 12-minute round and then a break and then one 10-minute round. So,
nice.
Very different from today's rule.
Yeah.
But, so I went to Japan. I started training very seriously in judo. The judo that I studied I was training at the Kodokan, but I also began training with a guy named Professor Hirata Kanae, who was an exponent of what's known as Kosen judo, which was basically ground fighting focused judo. And he took me under his wing, and he used to call me American champion, which I still think he was being ironic, because he's like, maybe he sucks or something. But he used to call me American champion. I'm like, I'm not a champion in anything. But he really took me under his wing, and I started studying under him very, very seriously, and became quite skilled in the ground game. And at the same time, I was doing the throws at the Kodokan. So I'd be at the Kodokan 6 days a week and, training with Professor Hirata at his gym, which was called the Mewaza Kenkyukai, on Saturdays. And then on Sundays, I would train with my friend Suzuki, and we'd do some shoot fighting gyms. And then sometimes during the week too, they would have these like shoot fighting training early in the morning. So I'd go visit those schools, and also did some full contact fight. Was moving more towards the full contact kickboxing, but again, because I had a karate background, I became friends with some of the karate guys there, but they were doing, full contact, with gloves and everything like that. So anyway, so I was in Japan. I was having a great time. I was loving it. I just, everything was fantastic. And then I got hit by a car.
Wow. Yeah.
And I got hit, it did some nerve damage to one leg, and it caused some fractures and other things and others. I experienced some very serious injuries. And the interesting thing about nerve damage is it gets worse over time.
Right.
So when I got hit, I had these fractures, and it hurt and things were weakened. I had it eventually turned into an avulsion, which is the ligament ripped off my bone. But at that point, it was just sort of like a crack, and I didn't even know how bad it was. But I knew I had this nerve damage. But I went back to America, and where I saw a doctor in Japan, and he's like, "Man, this is bad. You got to go to America." And so he's like, "I know the specialist in New York, and you live in New York, so you should just go home to your mom and take care of this, because this sucks."
Wow.
He's like, "I'm the best guy in Japan at this, and my mentor's in New York, so he's the one who taught me. You should be with him." So I went back, and first I had one procedure done, and I tried to go back to Japan, but it wasn't enough. And then finally I had to come back completely and get a bunch of surgeries and the nerves removed completely instead of trying to work around them.
Wow.
And I lost the actual use of my left leg for a while.
Wow.
And my right leg was always wonky. I mean, I completely lost the use of my leg. It was agony every moment. It just became unendurable. So I had the surgeries to remove all the nerves, and I'm in some medical textbook. My doctor told me, he's like, we haven't had a patient that had as many neuromas, in damaged nerves in one place as you. So you should be very proud of yourself. You're going to help doctors, medical students get better at their jobs. I'm like, wow. Thank you very much. Yeah. So I got that surgery. Little by little, I got back to health, but it took a long time. It took a really long time.
How long before you could start training in martial arts again?
Yeah, so I got hit by. I was in Japan for 6 years. It was 1988, end of 1980, where that really happened, and then I came back to Japan, but then left completely in December 1988, and was back in 99. And then I actually was able to walk after the surgery, but I kind of walked wonky, but I couldn't train. And my doctor's like, yeah, I don't think you're going to be training ever again. I don't think that's going to happen. But I didn't believe him. And I'm glad I didn't, because I was able to rehab my leg. I had a great physical therapist. And about 2 years later, a little bit, 2000 was when I started kind of training again. And I had this experience. I went to visit my sister in California, and my sister happened to live a couple blocks away from Rigan Machado's academy, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Academy. And I said, these ground fighters, and the Gracies were known as having some sort of, inter-style rivalries, but I heard things about the Machados that were always good, that they're very welcoming and Judo people, and they're very cool. And I'm like, wow, this is like just a couple blocks away. I could just walk over there. So I walked in, and it was just awesome. And I also realized that I didn't know as much as I thought I did. And, I've been training in Japan. I've been training with some good guys. I'm like, dude, I'm the shit. I'm pretty good at this grappling stuff. And then I trained with this one who was actually promoted to that day. He was promoted to his brown belt. His name was Ryan. And I'm like, brown belt, man, I got this guy. I just got wrapped up in they call it the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu involuntary yoga. I just put into yoga poses. I didn't want him. And he was so cool. The guy Ryan was so cool. He's like, hey, you're good. You just don't understand the dimension, this extra dimension that I'm doing. And when he put it like that, I'm like, I got it. I understand, because I saw this is mixed style grappling. You're adding things. You're adding dimensions that don't exist because of the rules in judo, or because the way it works, like the way we think judo guys think. Judo guys think in terms of pinning. So I will get you down and I will pin you and I can win. And I can submit you from being on top, on the side. I can submit you from anywhere. But there's no hierarchy like, hey, this is good, but this is better and this is best. In the grappling, it's like, hey, whatever you get is good. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is very different. There's an absolute hierarchy that the positions are understood, that some of these positions are better than others. Some of these submissions are better than others. And some of these ways of thinking strategically are better than others. So that was the extra dimension. And immediately when he said that, I understood what he was talking about. And I'm like, sold. I got it. But that being said, there's always a little bit of pride as someone who comes from another style. So I was like, yeah, I'll cross train with these jiu-jitsu guys, but I'm still a judo guy. I'm still karate guy, whatever, like a little bit of that arrogance kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
But over time, it just wore off, and I'm like, no, this is stupid. We have to think away from styles and stuff. And this Brazilian jiu-jitsu, this is good. This is good. I like this. And that was in California because my sister was living there. But what happened was I moved back to New York. I lived in New York, and they said, oh, this is our New York representatives. And one of those two brothers, Marcos and Marcelo Santos, and I joined their New York Academy and started training with them, and really started exploring the game. And that was just right before 9/11, if I'm not mistaken. And then 9/11 happened, and then the gym was kind of destroyed.
Wow.
And then we kind of had to rebuild from there. But I had a very personal relationship with them because we kind of went all through 9/11 together and had to rebuild the gym. And it was just a few of us that when we rebuilt, and I was growing together with those instructors, still going out to California to train with the Machados and just trying to learn that game. But the game that we were playing back then was people would walk into the gym in 1999 and 2000, saw the UFC and wanted to do jiu-jitsu. And to them, Brazilian jiu-jitsu and the UFC were synonymous. They're just like, people would be like, yeah, this is fighting. It wasn't like, oh, I want to walk into jiu-jitsu school and lose weight. It was not like that. Yeah. Everybody there that I was training with at the beginning had other martial art experience. So it was like you walk on the mat. My friend Andreas, who became my serious martial art brother, he had extensive, taekwondo, some shoot fighting training too. He had Muay Thai training. He had Kali training, a very, very, very experienced martial art. Another one, I wrestled a little bit in this, another person did this. So everybody in the room was coming from years and years of martial arts. And then we're like, oh, now we're doing jiu-jitsu. And eventually all of us want to try MMA, right? Or we want to be doing what these guys do. So there was a very, very strong intensity in that. And then it was also the time where people would come in and challenge. I witnessed a guy come in and challenge my instructor right there. And, just walk in and like, hey, let's go. It's like, all right, let's do it. Boom. It's a fight. And that was that generation. And it was a hard hard generation. And the training was very hard. And I loved it because it reminded me of Japan, because most schools in America, the training is a little bit more recreational. In this gym, the training was fun and it was great, but it was also very, very oriented towards a realistic form of combat. However, what we didn't realize is also there's training in the gi and training without strikes often. And so you realize that there's 3 points of original triad in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. There's you train in the gi, right? You train the self-defense, right? Which is, like guys tries to mug you and that was those things. And then you train Vale Tudo, right? And those are the 3 things you always train, and they're sort of synergistic with each other. But what happened is, first, the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tournaments started getting very popular, and gi and no gi, and nobody wants to do the self-defense. Nobody wants to do it. It's boring. They don't want to do it, right? And of course, Vale Tudo is really, really hard. Then the injuries pile up and things like this. Nobody wants to do that. So there was a push from Carlos Gracie Jr., as I understand it, to help start sport jiu-jitsu becoming very, very popular in America, and not just America, but in the world. And that really took hold. So if you look at almost any Brazilian jiu-jitsu school today, it is not like the original school where they did the 3. They would train sport jiu-jitsu, they train the self-defense. I mean, every day we would do self-defense. Yeah. And every day, and maybe, at least once a week, we would be training in a Vale Tudo context, But now it's the Vale Tudo and the self-defense are missing. And most schools, some schools still do the self-defense, but very few schools do the Vale Tudo training, if at all, ever. And that means you're missing a very important part of the art, and you become a sportsman. And you just fight to the rules. And there becomes more and more complexity because you are saved in a lot of places from getting hit by the rules. You don't have to do takedowns. You don't have to worry about in your environment like a cage or, up against a wall. All you have to do is, you grapple and I grapple. And I don't even have to wrestle. I can sit on my butt.
Right.
And let me tell you, that's a really big problem in jiu-jitsu because a lot of jiu-jitsu guys don't have good wrestling. Even in the old days, I wouldn't say the jiu-jitsu guys were amazing wrestlers, but they knew the foundation of how to pick someone up and put them on the ground, particularly if the person didn't know how to wrestle. These days today, a lot of people do Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And even if they're training with someone who doesn't understand grappling at all, they can still have a very difficult time taking them down. That is a very big problem. If you cannot put someone on the ground, you cannot, and keep them there, you cannot ground fight them. Right. Because you didn't put them on the ground and you didn't keep them there. So this is something that changed over time. And I realized, I'm like, wow, this is the same thing going on in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. What happened in other arts? That other arts were more MMA or more focused on something holistic and meaningful, like Bruce Lee said, where we're fighting in all ranges and this. But what happens is because of the nature of the sport, people become very myopic in competing and succeeding in that dimension. And to me, it was the opposite of what I experienced in Japan when I saw MMA. I saw MMA and I'm like, this is it. And the natural progression was to go to the people who were known to be winning in MMA, which was jiu-jitsu. But at that time, it started switching, and you started seeing a lot of people losing in MMA from jiu-jitsu when they started meeting people who are much more holistically trained, much more multidimensional. And the jiu-jitsu guys who were coming from the sports side, who were not as good as wrestlers and not as good as strikers and couldn't put it together well, were having trouble. And the first iteration of this was, when you saw grapplers fighting wrestlers who would just deny the takedown. They would sprawl and then would brawl. And, Chuck Liddell was one of the first of these. He would sprawl, but people don't give Maurice Smith enough credit. He was another one too, where he's like, okay, you're a grappler, but I'm going to anti-grapple. I'm going to take that grappling away from you, make you tired, and then I'm going to knock you out, and that happened to a lot of people. I remember in the UFC, a Japanese fighter named Takahashi fought, I believe it was Walid Ismail in the UFC. I believe it was Walid, but he was fighting a jiu-jitsu practitioner. And the jiu-jitsu practitioner kept shooting for a takedown. And Takahashi just kept sprawling and hitting him, sprawling and hitting him, sprawling and hitting him. And then the Japanese fighter won because Walid, if I remember correctly, it was Walid. He just got really tired. And then he's like, dude, I can't shoot anymore. And I'm exhausted. My hands are dropping. And bam, 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 bam. And so you started seeing jiu-jitsu guys really losing. And I'm like, there's a problem here. But I wasn't able to articulate it. And I couldn't put my finger on it because I was training. I was in that system and I saw problems, but I wasn't exactly sure what the problem was. But I realized on one day, one very fateful day, the biggest problem with where jiu-jitsu was going. And I was training with my friend John, and John was a judo practitioner, but his judo school was also a Japanese jiu-jitsu school. And to get a second degree black belt, they had to do a kind of like self-defense round, but which would start striking and would include ground and pound. So they weren't as clean on the ground as jiu-jitsu guys are, but they would throw you because their throws are excellent. Excellent judo school, produced many, many judo champs. But the minute they threw you, they'd get a dominant levered position, and then they would unleash a furious assault of strikes. So it'd be throw, ground and pound, throw, ground and pound, clinch, throw, ground and pound. And his school, you had to master that paradigm if you wanted to get a higher rank. And you would have matches like that. So he wasn't a normal jiu-jitsu school. It was a little bit more fight oriented. And, Judo John was training with us, and he was a wonderful guy. And in straight up no punches rules, whether I was wearing the gi or no gi, didn't matter. I was just better on the ground. I trained in Japan. I'd already trained years in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at this point. I went down to Brazil. I trained in Brazil. I trained with the Machados in California. I was putting a lot of time in. And I was, doing well on the competition circuit. Even though I really didn't like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu competitions, I did it because my instructor said we should. I'd won this competition and a few others and, whatever. So I was like, oh, John and I are going to roll. So they said, John, hey, let's mix it up. Well, let's start adding in strikes, right? Like I saw in the MMA, right? Let's start adding in strikes. He's like, oh, yeah, I did that. I did this thing, for my secondary black belt in test. I had to do this thing where I ground and pound. I was like, yeah, do that. Just don't hurt me. He's like, no, I'm cool. We'll do it. So we start up, and I am 100% expecting to beat him because 99 out of 100 rolls when we roll before, I would just beat him. I'd beat him, right? Not that he wasn't good. His throwing was beautiful. But on the ground, I was just more experienced. Right? Mm-hmm. So I was 100% expecting to beat the snot out of him, like I usually do. And it was one of the worst beatings I've ever taken in my life.
Wow.
But I didn't get hurt because he was such a cool, wonderful guy. But I probably, in a 10-minute roll, I probably was hit about 1,000 times.
Wow.
And I realized my gripping, my understanding of angles and posture, and this was completely wrong. What I was doing sports jiu-jitsu grips. I was doing no gi and gi, and I was leaving my head open to just eating that furious assault of ground and pound. And I'm like, whoa, this is not working. Without punches, I can beat him easily. With punches, my entire game falls apart. Uh-oh, this is a problem. I've become one-dimensional again without even understanding, without knowing it, because we started focusing on the sport jiu-jitsu and we weren't training enough Valley Tudo and all the other stuff. We started really focusing on the sport jiu-jitsu, and I was competing in it. And you do what you do, even if once a week you're adding in some strikes here and there. That's just once a week. What you do when you fight is what you do, what you know, what you practice 9 out of 10 times. You're going to do if you do things 9 out of 10 times, on the 10th time, you're going to do that thing. You're going to do what you do. Right. You can't be like, in a real fight, I wouldn't do this. No, your body doesn't adapt to the new circumstance. It does what it knows. It automatically goes to what you train it to do, which is why we rep things all the time, right? And I realized all my grips were in. The only grip that was working was this guard that I learned in Japan. And it's since been called the rat guard after me, but it's this way of locking the guy down. And I just took a breather. I'm like, it was the only thing I could get. And I'd always practiced it because I learned it in Japan based on an old judo move. And I kind of played with it. I've been playing with it for years, try to adjust it to no-gi and this. But, it was just one of the many things I did. But at that moment, it was the only thing that saved me over and over again from just getting my face pounded into Idaho, right? But thank God I wasn't getting hurt because my training part was so cool. So I said, okay, I'm doing something wrong. This paradigm of training, the way we're training now, there's something wrong. And you know what? Other people started understanding. Why are jiu-jitsu guys losing so much in grappling or in MMA? Why are they not defending the punches? What's going on here? There's something wrong with what we're doing. We're not doing as well as we used to. And it isn't just that people are getting better. It's that the jiu-jitsu training, the fundamental day in, day out training is not Valley Tudo training. It's sport jiu-jitsu training. And they are different arts. They are different. Yep. And Eddie Bravo, who's very famous for his rubber guards, started understanding that. And he said he based what he was doing on looking at the old things that Renzo Gracie was doing and some of the guys in their old Valley Tudo fights in Brazil. And I'm like, you're right. If we're not closing the distance, either we're super close or super far, the guard will die. And that's the number one rule of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu in self-defense. You're super close and you ruin the ability to first generate vital force, or you're super far. And you have to play the guard that way. You have to play your clinch that way, super close or super far, not middle distance. And then I started developing the rack guard over and over again and started developing into this really, really fundamental system. And I just walk into the gym and be like, I'm going to do rack guard all day. All I'm going to do is the rack guard. I'm going to pretend that people are punching me. Either I'd ask people to punch me or I would pretend that they're punching me.
Nice.
And I would just train it day in, day out, day in, and started developing that system based on that control. And, came up with something, I think, pretty cool. And the system has proven itself in combat, not just for me, but every time it's been used in the UFC, it has had a 100% success rate in defending ground and pound.
Wow.
No other guard comes close. And it's been used in a number of title fights. It was used against Tim Elliott versus Demetrius Johnson. It was also used by Alexa Grasso and against her fight in Shevchenko. Both Demetrius Johnson and Shevchenko are known as incredibly skilled ground and pounders. And yet the rack guard shut down the ground and pound completely. And in Alexa Grasso's case, she used that to shut it down, wound up using it, and then got up, and then took Shevchenko's back and then choked her out. And I'll tell you, she's not even good at the rack guard. She's like, I could completely fix that, And so every time it's used, it was also used by this guy named Juan Carnero. It's been used by a number of people. It was also recently used in ONE FC by one of the Ruotola brothers. It wasn't an MMA fight, but he did it in a grappling match. But most importantly, I really look at MMA. Every single time it's been used in a high-level match, it has been successful. So that tells me that we're on the right track, not just by me, but it's the most important thing about science is that things are repeatable. Right? That your evidence shows that it is a repeatable. Like you do an experiment in New York, and I do an experiment in California. Another person does an experiment in Poland. Given the same input and the same process, we should be coming out with the same results. All things being equal. Right. That's science. That is repeatability. And rack guard has proven the test of time more than almost any guard that it is eminently, one, it's an easy guard. I did it with messed up legs. Like I said, I came back to jiu-jitsu and my legs were never the same. And yet it was the easiest guard for me. That's one of the reasons I played it, because I no longer had the flexibility because of the leg injuries. It's so easy to enter and it's so effective because it basically changes the nature of the guard. So if you're, and you said you'd know jiu-jitsu, if you're in the guard, say you're in my guard, you're underneath me, correct?
Yep.
Right? But what rack guard does is it changes it because my head will now be above your head. So now I've achieved high ground. I'm on top of you. A good portion of my body's on top of you, putting weight on the back of your head. So now you have to carry my weight. So you're not really underneath me. You're not on top of me anymore. You're underneath me. So I have the balance of gravity is on my side, and I have leverage against the cervical spine on your neck. So putting a lot of weight on the back of your neck. And now I have power. I can use my legs. I can hip escape. I can move to the side, and I can start attacking people that way. And I can change the paradigm. What would be something that I have to fight gravity and I'd have to fight your strength is now you have to fight my weight and gravity. So that became a core of my system. And so I went down and started using it. And my nickname in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was Ratão, which is Big Rat, because people, I guess, think I'm a sneaky little rat. Because I couldn't be stronger and I couldn't be faster. So I had to be sneakier. And then people started saying, oh, that's guarda de Ratão. That's Ratão's guard. That's his guard. And that became abbreviated to rack guard. I never named it because, as I said, the guard I learned in Kosen Judo. I learned it years ago. And I'm very good friends with a person named John Will, who's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu pioneer. And he said he actually learned that guard in Brazil in like 1982.
Oh, wow.
So, because given the same input and the same critical thinking, everybody will come to the same conclusions, right?
Yeah.
Or similar conclusions, right? So it's not like some Japanese guy is the Einstein of martial arts and thought of something that nobody else did. No. Same input, same critical thinking, people are going to come to the same conclusion. So the rack guard has existed in a lot of places, I'm sure, but I did refine it. In Japan, it was mostly primarily using a belt grip. So I said, well, people don't wear big gi belts, so I'm going to grab inside my knee. What most people do is they grab on the outside of their knee. And when they grab on the outside, you actually rotate your hand differently and it becomes very uncomfortable. And it takes away the efficiency of your position. You also can't put pressure on their neck as well. When you grab on the inside of your knee, suddenly you feel much more powerful and you can start generating leverage and start moving much more comfortably. So that was an innovation that I came up. I haven't actually seen people independently do it my way. Most of the time they've learned it from me or someone I taught it to. But that being said, I'm sure if someone came up with it on their own that way too. But now it's pretty much known as the rack guard, and it's a set position, and people are doing it all over, and it's pretty cool. It's funny because I introduced the rack guard to an incredibly amazing practitioner named Barry Yoshida. He is more grappling in his pinky finger than I have my whole body. But I did the position on him, and being the one amazing master and humble guy that he is, he's like, René, what's that position you just did to me? And I said, oh, this is my rack guard. He's like, that's cool. I come back the next day and train his gym, and he's doing it on me. And actually, kind of irks me, but he was doing it better than me. And to this day, he's used it in competition. His students use it in competition, and they're also blowing out the position and trying to do lots of different variations and coming up with. Yeah, so we want to open source it. We want people to experiment with the position. Yeah. I found just on YouTube. I was just like on YouTube, and this video came up. He's like, guy teaching that guard, and I'm like, I click it, and it's interesting. I'm like, you're doing my game, but he did it differently. And I messaged him, and he's like, and then he was kind of, I was inspired by the video, and this is how I play the game now. Blah, blah, blah. So it's wonderful to see the guard getting out there. But at the end of the day, it's not an exercise in my vanity. I would not do it if it didn't stand the test of time. And look at the percentages. When it has been done in MMA, even not well, it has served as an incredibly effective defensive structure. So I've come up with other things too. And over time, I've noticed that they're just not high percentage. Right now, like I said, I want to get back to biomechanics. I don't want to talk about style. I want to talk about what works, what's biomechanically efficient, and really follow the Bruce Lee's adage of take what's useful, reject what's not, and then, make it your own. But then the question is, how do we know what's useful and how do we know it's not?
Right.
You as a Taekwondo practitioner have an opinion. This guy over here is a karate guy has an opinion. I have an opinion. Every martial art will have a different opinion of what's effective based on their competition experience and their personal experience. But that is limited. I want to ask you, how many competition matches do you have in Taekwondo?
I'm actually, I'm one who was never into the competition side of things.
Okay,
so I have one.
Right. Well, let's say you have 100.
Okay.
Let's say you have 100. Let's say you have 100 matches, right? And I have 100 judo matches, and the other guy has 100. 100 is a very small data set.
Yeah.
There's no scientist who'd say, yes, I did my experiments on 100 people, and I've definitively proved that this thing is true. That would never happen. That is a very small sample size. So we as individual martial artists cannot use our personal experience only as our arbiter of what works, which is what most martial artists do. We have what's called received knowledge. You receive the knowledge from your instructor, and your instructor received it from him. And it's from their experiences. I'm not trying to say that is wrong. It's just as a data set, it's limited. What we have to do is, and you can see this in it's growing as a trend. I'm not the only one doing it, but what we have to do is look at much larger data sets. So the data set that I work from is a data set that has 750,000 mixed martial art matches on it, right? The UFC stats databases, where it says all these fights that happen in the UFC, in Bellator, and this and that, and here's the database, and here's what happened. This guy fought this guy, and he won with this. This guy fought this guy, and he won with this. Oh, in this round, if you go to UFCstats.com, they have round-by-round analysis of significant strikes, of submission attempts, of takedown percentages. There's a huge amount of data. And what we want to do is moneyball martial arts for functionality. So what are the highest percentage moves? What is working as a finisher the best? What is performing the highest? Now, the dirty thing about martial arts, if we're talking functionality, we're not talking cultural activity, we're not talking in personal enjoyment. If your goal is personal enjoyment or cultural activity or exercise or what most people join martial arts for, which is funny, it's community.
Yeah.
Have a bunch of friends that you can hang out with. Great. That is great. You do you. My friend Haya, she's Japanese American. And she joined an Aikido school. And I said, hi, why'd you join an Aikido school? She's like, well, I want to get in touch with my Japanese culture. I'm like, wonderful, fantastic. You do you, right? Fantastic. Whatever your goal is for martial arts, that's great. I am not here to denigrate anybody's journey. However, when we're talking functionality, not all moves are equal. Some perform better as finishing moves, or some moves are really, really good. They're really, really good. However, they have high levels of associated risk. So, for example, in statistics, this is called polarizing outcomes. So, I either kick you in the face with a, narambang, like a spinning wheel kick or whatever, jumping, or, whatever, or I miss, completely give up my back and get choked out. Which is what happened to Shevchenko. So she, I told you the fight with Alexa Grasso, she threw a spinning back kick, just a regular spinning back kick. Mm-hmm. Highly effective move, but also high associated risk because you are making a dynamic movement which exposes your back. And she got jumped on, her back got jumped on, and she got choked down and she lost the fight. So we have to categorize moves by one. Are they highly effective? Okay. Do they do what they're supposed to do on a statistically significant level against a variety of opponents in a large data set? Number one. And some moves don't do that. They don't do that. They don't perform as high as other moves, right?
Right.
Now, right, the second one is, okay, high percentage move, but if it is a high percentage move with a high level of associated risk, when your life is on the line or your brain health is on the line, hey, maybe we don't choose that move first. Maybe we choose this move over here that has a lower level. So, for example, I'm going to give you $1 million and I say, hey, let's invest all of this stuff in Bitcoin. Now you might be the next richest guy in the world, but you also might lose your home.
Yeah.
Right? Versus, okay, let's put this on this, S&P 500 blue chip stock or whatever, which maybe your return won't be as great, but you have a low level risk. Or maybe there's this tech stock or whatever, I don't know, right? Which is very, Tesla, let's say, I don't know, whatever, SpaceX, right? Whoever's that. I'm not a Elon Musk fan, but whatever. I'm just the first thing comes to mind, where it's performing super well and there's no downside, which of course in investment doesn't exist, but you know what I'm saying, right?
Right.
So there's some moves like that. One of these moves is the rear naked choke. The rear naked choke accounts for more finishes in mixed martial arts than almost any other move in the entire curriculum of martial arts.
Right.
As a finisher, I'm not saying other martial art moves don't work. As a finishing move, the rear naked choke is incredibly efficient. It's also very, very, very low risk because the guy gets out of your choke. If you're controlling his back well, you just try again. There's not as much associated risk. Obviously, if you don't control him well, there's an issue there, but it's much lower risk. Is there no risk? No. There's no risk. The interesting thing is the other database we use, my instructor friends and I have put together, it's about 8,000 self-defense videos, a little less, but around 8,000 fight videos where it's CCTV footage of self-defense altercations. So there's, civilian versus civilian, unarmed versus unarmed, civilian versus law enforcement officer against in a prison setting. There's also riots where it's, whoever, we don't know what it is, with weapons, without weapons. We have some from battlefields, things like that. So you have lots of CCTV footage of combat, one-on-one combat and multiple person combat. And I'm going to tell you, there are about 453 or so of those fights we collected are won by a rear naked choke. About somewhere in that range. I forgot what the exact number is. I have never seen a video where the rear naked choke has failed to work to end the fight. Now, I'm sure there's one out there, but I've been looking for 15 years and I haven't found it. I'm sure there's one out there. There's no such thing as 0 and 100. It doesn't exist.
Right.
But it's so hard to find that I have not found a video where a rear naked choke failed to end the one-on-one fight. Now, there are some videos I have where one guy's choking the other one, and then he's also eating some kicks to the head. But you could say that the issue with grappling is you could say, well, it doesn't work on 2-on-1. Well, yeah, you know what? In boxing isn't so great either. Like fighting 2 and 3 and 4 people at the same time, extremely difficult. Right? There's a reason why people have weapons.
Yep.
But even still, in that video they have, the guy choked one guy out, ate the kick, got up, and then he started boxing the other guy. So, yes, he ate some kicks, but once the other guy was out, he got up and defended himself. So, but I've never seen a video where the rear naked choke, and let me tell you, a lot of these videos, the rear naked choke is terrible. It is not good. It is such a poorly applied choke. And one of those examples happened about 8 months ago, a little bit more, I'm sure. Here in New York, there was an incident with a homeless person on the subway who was mentally erratic, and an ex-serviceman, military man who was on the train. And the military individual felt that this homeless individual was a threat. That's neither here nor there. We can look at the video and decide one way or the other. But he felt that this person was going to assault someone else, stepped in and put a rear naked choke on him. It's one of the worst rear naked chokes I've ever seen applied in my life. He's not properly trained, but he actually killed the homeless person accidentally. Oh, wow. Yes, he held it and he killed him. He didn't even know what he was doing. That's also the danger there. He held it too long. But an incredibly poorly performed move still resulted in, the end of the encounter.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, incredibly tragic, the death of the other person. Now, I don't condone death, and that is a very, that example is very fraught with a lot of implications on how we deal with it. Personal security and homelessness and aggression on the subways and all this. I'm not talking about that. That is a totally different subject. I'm talking about the technical application of the choke. One of the worst chokes I've ever seen, and it still worked, tragically.
Yeah.
Right? So it says, what do we teach as martial arts? What should we do if your goal is functionality? If your goal is not functionality, do whatever you want. My academy and my thing is, how can I teach people not to happen to what happened to me? Meaning, wind up in a situation where someone might almost murder you, right? Or bully you or something like that. Yeah. How do you protect yourself, right? Effectively, particularly if you're outgunned physically. What are the highest percentage moves that offer you the best chance? And more importantly, what are the highest percentage strategies? And by analyzing two things, mixed martial arts, because freestyle fighting is very different from one-dimensional fighting. If you analyze mixed martial arts and you analyze self-defense encounters, you can come up with very, very, very interesting conclusions about what's working, what's not. And there's a video channel, too, that I recommend. It's a person named Armchair Violence. He just did a statistical survey of 251 knife assaults and what's working in knife self-defense, unarmed versus a knife, what's working in unarmed versus knife. And he's blowing open a lot of holes. Like you'd think, this move here would work. Yeah, no, it is not. Could it work? It could. We don't want to be it could. When your life is on the line, why would you bet your life on something that could work? Why don't you say, hey, this move is statistically proven to work more than anyone else? Okay, I'm going to start with this one, right? That's it. So that is really where I'm trying to go with our curriculum and my philosophy in combat. And I want to get away from jiu-jitsu. I want to get away from judo. I want to get away from karate. I want to talk about statistics and biomechanics and evolve that way. And again, getting away from single dimension stylistics, meaning if we train only in Taekwondo rules, if we train only in the karate rules, if we train only under Kempo rules, if we train only in Jiu-Jitsu rules, only in Judo rules, the meta will be different and the statistics will be different. And what is true as a high percentage move in competitive Judo with all its rules and regulations, and what's true in a street fight are different. Now, could that move work? And of course it could. Mm-hmm. Of course it could. But the question is, statistically speaking, is it the move you want to start with?
Right.
Is the move you want to teach on day one to a beginner who's completely outgunned and not a high-level athlete? Where do you want to start, right? So, a high-level athlete of any sport, any martial sport, has a chance in a self-defense encounter because they are a high-level athlete. They've been competing. But that's not the person I'm talking to. I'm talking about the lowest level athlete, the person who's uncoordinated like me, who struggled, who tried to make it work but couldn't. Okay, what am I going to teach this guy first? I may teach him a spinning back kick? No, I'm not going to teach him that. I'm going to teach him something that he can use right now, walk out of this gym, somebody messes with him, he has a good chance of defending himself. And just recently, one of my students had a very interesting encounter. This is one of many, but it just happened recently, a few months ago. My student is about 110 pounds, and he was on the dance floor on vacation with his girlfriend at the time. And they're dancing, and there's some alcohol, and literally he's about 110 pounds. He's very, very small, and he's just started here. He's been training here for not so long, and he's dancing with his girlfriend. And this guy who's about 220, 230, just shoves his wife and shoves his girlfriend and pushes the girlfriend to the floor.
Wow.
like literally, because, alcohol's involved. And my student says to him, he's like, dude, what are you doing? You can't do that. And of course, this person, alcohol fueled aggression and things like that, says, what are you going to do? And throws a punch at my student immediately. And clinch, takedown, rear naked choke. And he gave up over 100 pounds. And my student, he's going to feel bad when I say that, but he's not the most athletically gifted person.
Mm-hmm.
He gave up over 100 pounds. And he's fighting a guy who's way stronger. And we're dealing not with an elite level athlete who's years of competition experience and weight training and this, that. We're dealing with someone who's, just a regular guy. He works in the restaurant field. He has a day job. He's got a life. He's not thinking about being the next Conor McGregor. He just wants to learn how to defend himself. Took him down, choked him out. That's
cool.
it. And then let him go because he's like, hey, you don't even understand tapping. So I'm going to let him go, switch to mount and knee in the belly and say, hey, we're cool. And the guy's like, yeah, we're cool.
Nice.
And, that's what I want to give, that the power of statistics to my students. And my personal experience is valid. Your personal experience is valid. But we have to understand that every single teacher, regardless of style, your data set, your experience is limited because 100 like I have 17 MMA big Valley Tutor matches, right?
Mm-hmm.
17 matches. And then I have a bunch of, few hundred competitive, whatever, right? I don't even know how many matches I have, but, a few hundred of this, a few hundred of that, right? But as a data set, that's my years, my entire life, my 49 years in the martial arts pales in comparison to the 750,000 matches in this database or to the 8,000 that we collected in a street fight. So, science, this is what science is. And this really irks me. This really, really irks me. It's like you go on anybody's page and they're like, yes, we have a scientific approach to combat. Do you know what science is? do you understand what the science is? So I'll tell you what grad school helped me with this. It was undergrad too, but grad school helped me because they have this, you walk into Columbia and like, hey, this is actually how you do scientific work. I mean, obviously it was in the humanities, but you have to approach your academics with a type of rigor that is commonly accepted as something, very, very strong evidence. So if you're going to say this conclusion, the evidence that you bring to bear must be strong. And this is how science works. One, like I said, repeatability, data sets. So there's a lot of, errors that you can make. You have too small a data set. You have statistical, there's a whole course where you have, this is the statistical mistakes you make. You have this data set, but you manipulate the data accidentally this way and your conclusions are wrong. So as a researcher, you have to go through this training to understand how to think scientifically. Most martial artist people that I know have not finished college, let alone had a deep understanding of how to approach things scientifically. But on everybody's website, there's, yes, we have a scientific approach to combat. Well, if you're going to say the word science, what you should do is understand what the scientific method is.
Right.
And the first thing is your data set as a human being, regardless of how many fights you have, unless you have more fights than every other human being on the planet, times 10,000, which means you're a psychopath, your data set is not going to be enough. So you have to reach outside of your group, outside of your style, and start to think about what's going on in the larger world, right? And start drawing on those conclusions. So now, as I said, this is for functionality. If your goal is to teach, like there's a person I know, and he's like, I don't teach self-defense. I don't teach combat. I don't teach this. I teach people to have fun, have community, get a workout. And we have almost like, martial arts inspired fitness. Mm-hmm. And that is a wonderful thing because, we're dealing with an obesity epidemic here. So just having a place for kids to come and have some fitness or adults to come and have some fun in a community. And we're very lacking in community these days. That is very worthwhile. I'm not saying anything's bad. But again, if we're talking about serious functionality, then we have to be more rigorous in our approach. Right? You can't just say, hey, it worked for me. It worked for me, so it'll work for you. No. Okay, you're 6 foot tall, 220 pounds, lift weights all day, and you're saying this to a girl who's, 5'2" and, 90 pounds or something. Yeah, it worked for me, so it'll work for you. That's ridiculous.
Right.
But that's what most martial art people do. It worked for me, so let me teach you what I did. Or let me teach you what my instructor taught me. Or let me, received knowledge is problematic if we don't, sort of study those conclusions rigorously, hey, okay, yeah, I'm not saying that it's not completely invalid. But what we have to do is we have to take a critical eye to it and really, really understand that what is it? Is it truly as valid as we think it is?
I love the way your mind works. Definitely want to come visit your school sometime. I mean, I could talk to you for hours about martial arts. That's so
I'm
cool.
sorry that I talked so long.
No.
I know before the interview you said, well, I had one person who answered a question with a 40-minute rant. I think I beat him.
You might have, but that's
I'm
okay. That's okay. No. Well,
I'm very passionate.
No, it's good though. And I can tell that. I can hear that in your voice, which is awesome. So I do have kind of like some fun, I don't like to call them rapid fire, but some fun questions to wrap up the interview. So this first one here, it doesn't have to be 4. I've had people give as few as 2 and as many as 8. It's kind of up to you, but 3, 4, 5 names you would put on your personal Mount Rushmore of martial arts.
Oh, okay. Personal meaning.
It's your choice.
Journey,
like I've had people put
the world themselves.
No, it's completely up to you. It's your you get to build a Mount Rushmore. Because I've had people give, Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris. I've had people only list people they've trained with. I've had people only list people from their own style.
I'll do both for a second.
Okay.
They won't mean meaningless to anybody, but I had an instructor as a child. Like I said, Mr. Miyazaki was my second father. I met someone in Japan, Professor Hirata Kanae, who was also a great mentor. I also had he's amazing judoka, Steve Blower, who's absolutely insanely skilled judoka, became like my big brother in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the many jiu-jitsu instructors I've had here. But one of the most influential people was, of course, the Machado brothers, which I'll put them as the brothers, because they just showed me a level of they created an environment, not just their gym, but an association of people who were committed to pushing the envelope of grappling, and also allowing the freedom to get away from orthodoxy. So this is, the wonderful thing about the Machado brothers is that you can go to like Eddie Bravo, and probably maybe just less than heard of Eddie Bravo, but he's a pioneer in the Nogi game, came up with his own guard too. But, they're like, hey, Eddie, you do you. And then, the Machado brothers reached out to the JKD community and they're like, we respect what you do and here's what we do. And they allow a level of freedom. And as I said, I'm very, very close with one of the people in the Machado community named John Will, who's a jiu-jitsu pioneer. And I was looking, he's like, yeah, I do it this way, even though traditionally it's this way. The Machados allow for your personal exploration, which is something that is very, very sometimes lacking in other arts. They allow there's no orthodoxy. There's just, hey, you do you. And that's a very powerful thing. They created an environment where that was allowed, and it allowed me to explore the rack guard. It wasn't like, no, you just do what we do, right? That was a very wonderful and powerful thing. And they're also, the brothers themselves are incredibly wonderful and nice people. There's too many instructors to list that right. Here, but that was my personal journey. In a larger martial arts format, I would say the first one we have to give credit to is Jigoro Kano. People do not really appreciate the amount that this person contributed to all martial arts. So if you do karate because of Jigoro Kano. Why? Because he invited, Funakoshi to the Kodokan, set him up in Tokyo and said, hey, you go teach your thing. Here, let me help you. Right. And that's how Shotokan got started. Before that, Funakoshi was living in Okinawa, hanging out, teaching school. Like, he got invited by Kano up to art. If you do Aikido, right? If you do Aikido, probably, you were helped because Kano said to Ueshiba, hey, why don't you do this demonstration in front of, the emperor, because this is martial arts. And, if you do almost any martial art, you have some connection to Jigoro Kano, especially mixed martial arts, because the Gracie family learned from Maeda, who was a, Kano student. And he synergized, he created a modern understanding of randori, of developing your technique through combat, and in ways that were safe and sustainable. And he also took away the idea of like, okay, we're not going to wear armor anymore. Almost all jiu-jitsus, and I did Japanese jiu-jitsu, they're like, okay, we're going to train with swords today, and we're going to, put on armor. I'm like, okay, this is cool, but, it's not really, nobody wears armor anymore. He's like, okay, we're kind of beyond that, And people realize that Jigoro Kano was also a very, 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 very strong fan of Western wrestling, and he actually organized a Western wrestling team, one of the first Japanese Western wrestling team to compete in the Olympics in freestyle wrestling. So, he's a visionary, a man who was about the larger martial art community and giving back to lots of different styles and creating venues for all sorts of martial artists to grow, not just itself. So I don't care what style you do, you owe some debt somewhere to Jigo Nakata. The second I would say is, the Gracie family, with a very strong emphasis on Rorion Gracie, who some people think is kind of a jerk or whatever. He's a complex personality. But if you have an interest in mixed martial arts, if you have an interest in jiu-jitsu, funny enough, if you have an interest in Muay Thai, right, you owe a debt to Rorion Gracie. Why? Because he created the first UFC. And the first UFC created a business model and a marketing for jiu-jitsu, for full contact fighting. Before the UFC, there was one Muay Thai school in New York City, and it was run by this guy named Phil Nurse, who's absolutely an amazing practitioner. One school, and there was this other guy over here, and you had to kind of look, and nobody was like, "Oh, what do you need Muay Thai for?" It's just, and after the UFC, the interest in the West for full contact martial arts, whether it's striking, whether it's jiu-jitsu, whatever, for full contact martial arts just grew. Yeah. So, every time you watch MMA, you're going to see some techniques from kickboxing or which like American kickboxing is great, but even in terms of financially, it failed. It failed. Like the kickboxing rings failed to attract attention. And then the kickboxing gyms, they were always around, but they're not really much. And then the UFC comes, and now kickboxing's back, Muay Thai's back. These are because we see it. It's been this massive advertisement for full contact training. Right. And people are like, hey, that's cool. I want to do that, So the Gracie family and Rorion Gracie had such a watershed impact on martial arts, and of course, to show the importance of grappling. So, judo was never popular in America. Most of the reason that judo schools can actually financially make it is very often because Ronda Rousey showed that judo is pretty freaking cool, in this generation. That being said, obviously they've been around for a long time, but we all owe a debt to the Gracie family for starting the UFC bandwagon. Even if you hate the UFC, like so many martial arts are like, oh, it's, it's the behavior so bad and this, and I agree with that. I do agree with that. That two things can be equally true. We decry the horrible behavior, but we also have to understand that we owe the UFC a huge debt for allowing us to make a living. Those two things can be simultaneously true. And I think ONE FC does it really well because they get the martial arts down really well and they control the behavior. They're like, dude, you can't act like a jerk. Yeah. You act like a jerk, we'll kick you out of the gym, out of the promotion. So, hopefully the UFC will get out of the, showmanship thing, but we owe the Gracies a debt for creating that mixed martial art bandwagon and reinvigorating, the martial arts and showing the value of full contact training. Who else? So many. It's easy to say someone like Bruce Lee, and I would say that, it's very easy to say, but, philosophically, he's a brilliant guy. I mean, he was a brilliant guy. I don't think, I'll say something controversial here. I don't think he was as good a fighter as many people think of him, because there's this Bruce Lee had obviously like, oh my God, he could kill guys with his pinky and this and that. Looking at his video, even for his time, his technique was fine. It was fine, but I wouldn't say that he was the best martial artist of his generation if you go around the world. Now you're probably saying, well, he was a great kickboxer. I'm not saying he's not. But if you put him against the top freestyle wrestler in the world in the 60s, you could put him against the top judo guy in the world in the 60s, and you put him against Okano or one of these old school top judo guys from the 60s.
Gene LaBelle.
You put him up, I mean, like Gene LaBelle, right? Exactly. Exactly. And you put him up against those guys. I'm not going to say he wasn't good, but best in the world, we can't say that. And you put him up against the top Muay Thai guy of that generation, the top. I mean, the cream of the top. You put him up against the Willie Pep, the best lightweight boxer that generation, something like that. It's not going to be close. It's not going to be close. It's true. And I think he understood that. He was very good at creating his own. Like I think, just like we said, the UFC is a big, massive commercial. Bruce Lee was an entertainer, and he understood that he had to create some sort of aura and a commercial to promote himself, particularly to combat racism. And that to me is a wonderful thing. Bruce Lee, biggest contribution aside from martial arts was a respect for Asian culture and at some level even Asian males. Like there's a lot of racism towards Asian males,
Yeah.
and a respect for that culture, and to treat Asian culture as an equal to Western culture, because and with respect, not as something to be looked at as secondary. And I remember that the martial art revolution. You're 50, so you probably remember too. I mean, in 1976. Every kid wanted to have some nunchucks. Every single kid wanted to be Bruce Lee or David Carradine from Kung Fu.
Yeah.
which was a ripoff on Bruce Lee.
Yeah.
I don't think, he is a cultural icon. And he's also, the other thing is he's a very, very thoughtful and intellectual person who said, philosophy of martial arts is important, and understanding that not all styles have the answers. And he said something a long time. People don't like to hear this one, but not only did he say get away from the classical mess, but he said a D1 All-American wrestler, a D1 All-American would go to Asia and beat up almost every Asian master. He said that, and he was right. All things being equal, a guy with a really good double leg beats a guy with a really good jab. That's just a fact. So he was a person who was searching for the truth, and he was also a person who created a respect for Asian culture and Asian martial arts, and in a way that was genuine. I mean, he never, movie, the Bruce Lee movie is fundamentally different from a Steven Seagal movie.
Yeah.
There's no glorification of violence. There's always a meditative aspect and things like that. And that's a wonderful thing. So yes, absolutely, I would put Bruce Lee up there.
Okay.
And then, okay, so the last one, I got one more, right?
Yeah, one more.
Okay, this is gonna sound, I don't know. That's a good question. I would say, I don't know, Ali. Yeah, Muhammad Ali.
He's been picked a few times. That's a good one.
Yeah. And I would say, it's funny because every Muay Thai person I know who is from way back in the day, they said there was martial arts before Muhammad Ali and there was martial arts after Muhammad Ali. And you look at karate, look at the stance and the lack of movement in a stance pre-Muhammad Ali. And then you look at it after Muhammad Ali and you're like, whoa, there's a difference there. And the same thing happened in Muay Thai. The idea of being mobile, of using mobility as a weapon, obviously was always there. But Muhammad Ali took it to another level. And we worked from that paradigm of like, hey, and I'm talking, pre-ban Muhammad Ali, particularly the man who was just, gliding on his toes and clowning guys with his movement in heavyweight. Muhammad Ali was a heavyweight that moved like he was 125 pounds. He was just unbelievable. People move like Muhammad Ali, even if they don't think they are.
Yep.
It's just in the zeitgeist so much that this is effective movement, And it's funny because you see this thing where Mike Tyson, beats Muhammad Ali, and he's just like fanboying. He's just sitting there like, it's Muhammad Ali. And I remember seeing an interview, and they're like, in the interview says, oh, if you fought him, what would happen? This is Mike Tyson at the peak of his high career, and Mike Tyson sits there and he goes like, yes, I'm the champion now. But then there are icons. There's people even above that. And this is peak Mike Tyson, not Mike Tyson today, And he's like, it's not even a close thing. Yeah. And, he's looking at an older Mike Ali, and he meant it. So those are the people that I would choose.
That's good. All right. Do you have a favorite martial arts book?
Okay. It's funny because I'm looking at my library right here in my academy, and that's about 250 books minimum here, and then I have it all.
If someone comes in and says, hey, I'm looking to buy my first martial arts book, what's the one you recommend?
Okay, yeah, no, I mean, you know what? I wouldn't recommend a book like that. I'd recommend whatever. Okay, so a book should not teach you technique. Technique is good, but we have videos for that now.
Yep,
I think
agreed.
What something is to teach you how to think, how to conceive, how to understand the fight strategically. And there's a number of books like that. The one that I like the most there's two books that really changed it. The first one is Mastering Jiu-Jitsu by John Danaher and Renzo Gracie. And that came out decades ago, but basically explains why Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu looks the way it does and why it works better. And it does. One-on-one functionality works better than other grappling arts to overcome the aggression of another person. It's a fact. There's There's a fact. That's not to say that other martial arts don't do that.
Right.
But Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu has a specific way of doing it that allows a smaller person to do it better. Now, other martial arts can do it as well, but he explains the system behind it, the way why it works. And this is so understood now that it's obvious. Like, even people who don't do jiu-jitsu do this system now because it's just smart. But he explains the theory behind it, meaning positional control are not equal. There's some positions that are better than others, and this did not exist to the same extent in Kosen Judo. I'm the only person that's ranked in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Kosen Judo, so I can tell you this, that they said, hey, we can pin you this way, we can pin you this way, we can pin you this way. Yeah, figure it out, choose your own, whatever works for you. That's great. But objectively, there are positions that are much more powerful in a one-on-one fight than other ones. And you have to understand the hierarchy, the order of power of these positions and how to do that. So that is a very, very important book for me, and really made me think about why it was working, why jiu-jitsu beat me. I trained in Japan. I trained for years, and yeah, my legs were bad, whatever. But I walked into this jiu-jitsu school, and I'm like, I know some stuff, and they're doing things I don't understand, and I had to figure out why. And this book explained to me why. And then the other book is I would just choose that one. That would be the one I would choose. And even if you're a striker, a book to teach you how to think is something important. And let me tell you that the positional strategy of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is style agnostic, meaning you can take those same concepts and apply them to every single martial art and how to create angles. And if you look at Lomachenko, I say this crazy, but Lomachenko, one of the best boxers of our generation, a person who creates angles effortlessly. He's doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Of course he's not. I mean, he's doing boxing. But theoretically, what he's doing philosophically is exactly what Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu does. Okay. Creates angles and creates back exposure, and uses wedges and leverage and angles to be able to, and back exposure to be able to overcome larger, more aggressive opponents, and controls the distance. So I would say that. Yeah, that's my book I would recommend. It's very dry. I wouldn't know if I would recommend it to beginner because it's very, very, very dry.
That's okay. All right. Good. How about a favorite martial arts TV show?
Gotta be Kung Fu from the 70s.
Nice.
David Carradine. All yes. Right. I haven't watched it in a long time, but I remember, every, Saturday watching it on reruns for sure. It was just that was the thing. I don't actually know if I watched any other Kung Fu TV show, martial art TV show. What other martial art TV shows are there?
Oh, I mean, there's been a ton. I mean, they're like in the 80s, there was, The Master, there was Sidekicks with Ernie Reyes Jr. There was, Walker, Texas Ranger, Highlander.
Oh, right. Walker, Texas Ranger. Yeah.
Current ones, there was like Into the Badlands, Cobra Kai.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, okay, I got it. It's funny, but I don't watch a lot of martial arts movies or entertainment because, again, the purpose is different. Martial arts in movies is to entertain, and martial arts in real life looks very, very different. So a lot of times I watch these things and I'm just like,
yeah.
It's just the only one that I would say that I really enjoyed, even though the martial arts is, obviously doesn't work at all, is Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, because it's a beautiful movie. It's just a great movie. I'm like, okay, all right, it's not martial arts, it's fantasy. We're like Lord of the Rings. We're doing something different here. Okay. So I'm able to when they're flying in the trees, I can say, okay, I enjoy this because nobody can fly in trees.
Nice. Well, that actually answers the next question. I was going to ask favorite martial arts movie, so you'd probably go with that one then.
Okay, yeah, but you know what? Okay, but if we're talking realistic, there's some martial art movies there that are not fake that I really like.
Yeah.
So one of them sounds weird, but it's Fight Club.
Oh yeah.
It obviously is not a martial art movie, but there's not one moment of that movie that I can recall where the fighting is just fake.
Yeah.
That's how fighting looks. Another one. Okay, this is a horrible movie. It's a brutal, awful movie. Very, very. It's I forgot the name. It's this movie about this guy who gets arrested in Thailand and has to fight in the prison rings in Thailand, and if he wins, he can fight for free. And this is all true. This actually really happened. This guy got arrested in Thailand, and he goes to prison. They're like, well, you can fight in the ring, and then maybe get your sentence reduced.
Was that A Prayer Before Dawn?
Yes, superb. Yes, that's it.
The Billy Moore
yes.
story. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And there's a scene in that is so scary, and it's because it's done by criminals. It's a horrible scene, but that is the only scene in a martial arts movie or in a movie violence where I'm like, that's what real crime looks like. And he's in the prison, and he's going to the bathroom at 3 a.m, and there's another person there, and in seconds they're surrounded and have knives to their throat, and one of the person he's with is gang raped and then gets killed, right? Or kills himself, whatever. It's horrible. But I saw that and I'm like, as a person who's experienced violence and I'm like, that's what violence is. That's what exactly. It's the only time on cinema that I've ever seen something that looked incredibly realistic, because it turns out that those guys are actual prisoners. They filmed it in a real prison, and they're all like ex-murderers and stuff. They just did what they normally do. And that movie was intense, but it's also, in terms of like realism, something that, you know, you have to watch, right? And it's like, oh, this is what, when life has no value, this is what violence really, really feels like. And then in terms of it's a movie, but it's a documentary, is Choke, with Hicks and Gracie going to Japan.
I've heard a lot about that one. Yeah, I haven't seen it yet, but
you have to see it. It's the movie. I watch it at least once a year to just, you know, light the fires.
Nice.
You know, like, it's just unbelievable. It's absolutely, it's insane how amazing this practitioner was. And I had the fortune of meeting Hicks and Gracie. And, you know, sometimes they say your idols don't live up to, you know, you don't want to meet your idols and something like that. And in this case, it was completely not true. I met him, and like, just a wonderful, genuine, you know, real human being that has no airs. He has a aura, but he has no airs. You know, he has no like, oh yeah, I'm a badass. There's none of that. He doesn't have to project any of that. He's just a guy that he's reached a moment of self-actualization where he doesn't have to pretend anymore. And to be around that energy is like inspiring. And it's funny because I was sitting there was this tournament in Brazil when I was living there. I was down there training. And I went down there to this tournament with my instructor, and Hicks and Gracie was there. And he said, there's this long line for autographs, right? And my instructor goes, you know, why don't you get online and, you know, get an autograph? I'm like, nah, that's like cheesy, you know? And I'm like, nah, he's just get online. When are you going to meet Hicks and Gracie again? I'm like, okay, all right, get on. Right? And I get online, and he comes to me. He's like, oh, you're from America. You want an autograph or a picture or something like that? And I'm like, no, you know, I said to him, I just want to thank you and your family for what you guys did, because it meant a lot for me, you know, training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I feel that you guys are awesome and inspired me. And I, you know, so Choke, and I was actually in Japan when you were competing, and it's just very inspiring. And I just want to say thank you. And he's like, oh, no, that's great. And then we start talking. He's like, so you live in Japan? And we start just talking about sushi for like 5 minutes.
Nice.
And then the other people were waiting, and he's like, hold up, I'm going to talk to this guy. And it was kind of a cool experience. And he's one of those guys that this is what martial artist people should be. Now, is he a perfect human being? Absolutely not. There's no such thing. I'm sure he has his foibles, and by his own admission in his book, he had some moments where he was involved in not so savory things. And he also, by his own admission, was not a great dad, was kind of an absentee dad. And, you know, his marriage fell apart, and, you know, we're all probably human beings, but still, as a martial artist, he has something that I think we can all aspire to, you know, and as just a genuinely kind, humble guy. Amazing, you know? So I recommend everybody watch Choke, because it's absolutely cool. And one of the best scenes is he's fighting someone who I trained with named Yuki Nakai, who actually lost his eye in that he goes blind. He's lost his eye forever because a person before Yuki Nakai fought Hickson, a person he competed against stuck his thumb inside his eye and smushed his eyeball completely. Dang. So, you know, back then that's what it was, right?
Yeah.
So he went, and in the back room, Hoyler, who's Hickson brother, is like, dude, it's a fight. You're going to face this guy, punch him in the eyeball, and you'll win right away. That's all you have to do. And Hickson just stops and looks at his brother. He's like, no. That's not how a samurai does things. And so he spars him. I mean, he fights him. And he never, ever, he's just completely careful to not touch his eye, and he fights with honor. And he's like, no, I'm not going to do that. You know, I'm not going to hit his eye. I'm just not going to do that. This is disgusting. And, you know, like, but, you know, you don't realize, you're like, oh, that's an easy, I would never do that. But No, when you're fighting in front of 10,000 fans with the entire honor of your clan at stake, if you lose and money and this and that, like it's an easy win. You gotta fight after this too. So you could just punch him in the eye, get rid of through this round and go to the next one. That's a logical thing to do because you have a fight after this. So save your energy. But he just was not willing to do it. He would not do it. And he fought with honor and integrity. And it's one of the reasons why the Japanese do love him. Just like this compassion. There's like, we're martial artists. We don't do that stuff. Yeah. And his brother's funny. His brother's like, no, you got to just F him up, And he's like, he literally sits his brother down in the video. He says, absolutely not. And that's a moment, There's always times in our lives where we're tempted to do something and it's the easy thing. And probably nobody would criticize him for that. Because it's a fight, man. Right. The guy got injured in the last fight. Whatever. You do what you got to do. But in your heart that this is the coward's path. You know it. And we all had moments of temptation like that, where you could just say, hey, this is the easy road. And you know what? Nobody's going to care. The only person who'll know is me. That's it. I always do this and it'll be easy. Except you'll know, and you'll know it to the rest of your life.
Well, René, I got to tell you, this has been such a great conversation. I knew very little about you other than what I read on the website, and it's been so cool learning about you. And I just have to thank you for taking the time to do this. If there's any last minute parting words you want to leave the listeners with and kind of wrap up the show with.
Well, no, first I want to say it's been an incredible pleasure and an honor to be featured on your podcast. And speaking with you was tremendously fun. And it was a wonderful experience. So thank you. I would say, all the listeners out there, if you find some value in my videos, because I have a lot of videos online or on my channel or anything like that, I'm very honored and very happy.
Cool. And like I said, I have the link for your website ready. Any other links you want me to put out there, just send them to me, and I'll include everything when the episode comes out and make sure people come check out all your stuff.
Sure. Well, I appreciate that. Yeah. And it's been great. So I hope everybody trains hard and dedicates themselves to martial arts and we can kind of live the dream.
I love it, man. It's been a blast. I appreciate it.
No, thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist. We hope you will join us every week for a brand new episode with a different martial artist telling their story. If you enjoy the show, be sure to leave us a review. Also, be sure to check out our website at everydaymartialartist.com. There you can find all of our episodes and contact us to suggest guests and ask questions. Again, thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist, and we'll see you next week.